my name's Gail and I'm one of the speech and language therapists here at Oakwood Court College, and I wanted to have a chat with you today about how we can support our AAC users at home to learn to communicate more effectively. So thinking about the basics, what does the term AAC user mean? So the term AAC stands for Alternative and Augmentative Communication. And if we think about the words in that phrase, it kind of tells us what an AAC user is. So when you think about the word alternative, that always means that there's something that we can use instead of. So for some people, they have no spoken language, and they would use an AAC device or signing as a way to communicate instead of speaking. Whereas for some other users, they use AAC as a way to augment their speech. So they might have some spoken language, they might have a reduced vocabulary of words that they can produce in speech, and then they might use some kind of device or signing to go alongside that to support their communication and give them a broader range of ways of communicating with other people. And AAC is an umbrella term that covers a lot of ways of communicating. So when you think about the ways that we communicate, obviously we communicate using speech, but we can also communicate using gestures, or we can communicate using writing, and a lot of what we communicate is in our facial expressions. So we do a lot of communicating without actually saying a word. But there are more formal things that we can use to support somebody who doesn't have an effective method of communication with other people. Those include things like signing. We can use communication boards that are paper-based, such as this one. Or for some people, they use a more high-tech device that might be on an iPad or a computer. And that would have a communication package on there that has a range of symbols that they can use. They can program it in, and then it will give a spoken message to whoever it is they're trying to communicate with. So one of the things that's really important about communicating with an AAC user is that you remember that that is actually their main form of communication. So it's important that when you're speaking to an AAC user, you speak using their form of communication, their AC, whether or not that's signing, whether that's using the communication board that they use, or using the device that they use to communicate. And there are a couple of things that are really important about being a very good communication partner for somebody with AAC. One is that it's really important that you use whatever form of AAC they've got consistently and reliably. So you're using it at all times with them, and that you're remembering that it might be that some people use many different forms of communication. So although they may have, say for example, signing as their main form of communication, they may also use some spoken language, some vocalizations, some signs that are unique to them. So body language and gestures that aren't recognised Makaton signs but are still part of their vocabulary because they use them in a consistent way. So it's important that you remember to respect that and the fact that they are communicating in many different ways, and that you communicate back with them in a way that they're able to understand. A really important thing for people who are supporting AAC users is that they need to be really patient and really persistent. It's much more difficult to communicate when you use AAC. It's much slower and it takes a lot more time to put together your message. So having somebody who's willing to be patient and persist with AAC when actually it can be really difficult is something that's really important for an AAC user and really supports them to develop their communication skills. So what I get a lot of when I'm talking to parents and carers of AAC users is that people get really worried about the whole idea of teaching somebody to talk with the AAC. What I want to remind people is that actually communication is a really natural thing. And if you think about the way that language naturally develops in a child, babies are born obviously with no ability to talk, and all of the adults around them talk to them and they talk to each other, and those babies don't say a word but they're absorbing everything, and they learn from watching the people around them communicate that there's a value to communication, and that by communicating with each other, those people get what they want. And then they babble away. They keep trying to copy us. We keep talking around them. We talk to them. And then suddenly one day they produce a word, normally daddy. And we all go mad. We all give them loads of positive feedback. We communicate with them even more. And they learned that communication's a really powerful thing, and that communication's a way for them to get their needs met. And they learn more and more words, and they start putting all those words together into sentences. And they become effective communicators in spoken language. But for people who find speech difficult, they need to be able to use AAC to communicate just as effectively as those children who use speech as their primary way to communicate. And what we need to remember is, even though they're using a different form of communication than speech, the language development process is still exactly the same. So the way that people learn language, whether it's using sign, whether it's using a device, is by watching other people use that form of communication. So if you always communicate using speech, and your child or the person that you look after doesn't have the ability to communicate effectively using speech and needs to learn a different way to communicate, they are not going to be able to learn that from you speaking to them. To learn to speak AAC, what they need is for other people to speak using AAC with them. So somebody who needs to learn to sign needs other people around them signing all the time in order for them to pick up those language skills. And we call this modelling in the AAC world. And it's something that is a really natural thing. People get really worried about whether or not they're going to be able to model for an AAC user in the right way, whether or not they're going to be able to teach them the skills they need to learn to be a communicator with the AAC. But what I want people to remember is that this is a really natural skill. We teach children to speak all the time without any effort in our part. We naturally speak to them in smaller words. We use shorter sentences when we're speaking to children. And in the same way, we can change the way we communicate with an AAC user to help them learn to communicate. So it's just about switching our thinking and realizing that what we need to do is we need to carry on speaking to them, but we might need to add in something extra for them to be able to understand us and start using their own form of communication. So say, for example, when I'm teaching people to learn to use Makaton, I will continue to speak, but I would add modelling of key words to my communication. So where I might offer somebody some more of something, I might say, would you like some more of that? And I would say the word and I would do the sign at the same time. And that's all that modelling is. It's just narrating what you're saying through that chosen method of communication. Okay, so please don't get tied up in it. Please don't think there's any kind of magic behind it and that us speech therapists have a magic wand and suddenly we teach people how to speak with AAC. It is very much the same as a natural learning process of spoken language. You model it using your own speech and that method of communication. And the AAC user learns it because they're exposed to it over and over again. And one of the really important things, I think, is that this is something that is not just the speech therapist's job. So I might see somebody for, say, half an hour, 45 minutes a week. And if you look at the evidence of an average 18-month-old child, by the time they get to 18 months, they've been exposed to over 4,000 hours of spoken speech. Now, if you think about an AAC user, they need the same kind of exposure, but in the form of communication they're trying to learn. And if that's restricted to the half an hour or 45 minutes a week that I'm able to spend with them, they would be around 85 years old before they got that 4,000 hours of exposure that an 18-month-old child would get. So you can see that if we restrict learning language for AAC users just to speech and language sessions, it's never going to become an effective and competent way for that person to communicate. It's really important that everybody around them is modelling language all the time. And really don't get tied up in trying to model every single word that you're saying. with modelling, it's very important that you're just modelling the key words. So thinking about the words that really give a sentence meaning and just modelling those. And what I find for people who are learning to model is that I quite often say, choose 2 or 3 words that you feel really confident that you know. Either you know the sign for them, or you know where they are on the communication board, or you can find them on the device, and just model those for the week until you get more confident. And then maybe the next week you pick up a couple more signs, or you pick up a couple more symbols on the device and you know where those are, and you add them in. So it's a process of adding in more and more language as you become more confident in modelling that language. So over the next few weeks, we are going to be sharing loads of videos with you to give you some examples of how to model using AAC. So using lots of different types of AAC in lots of different environments, reading books, doing routines at home, doing craft activities. So if you keep tuned to the Facebook page, you should see a few more videos popping up. Please check out the guide that we've created for you. It should be in the link below.